The first bullet hit before Miriam Easton even realized the man reaching for her had stopped breathing. The second and third followed so fast they sounded like one long crack of thunder, and by the time she registered the fourth and fifth shots, 5 bodies were crumpling into the snow around her like discarded puppets. She stood frozen against the wooden wall of the abandoned trading post, her breath coming in short gasps that turned to white clouds in the freezing air, as a dark figure on horseback materialized through the swirling snowstorm like some avenging angel sent straight from heaven itself. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the snow-packed ground with barely a sound despite his size. He kept his revolver trained on the fallen men, moving between them with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before. Miriam watched as he checked each body, his face partially obscured by the collar of his heavy coat and the wide brim of his hat, snow accumulating on his shoulders like he was part of the storm itself. "They are dead," he said finally, his voice low and steady. He holstered his weapon and turned to face her fully for the first time. "Are you hurt?" Miriam shook her head, unable to find her voice. She had been traveling with a small wagon train from Fort Bridger to Riverton, Wyoming, where her aunt supposedly ran a boarding house. When the November storm had blown in with unprecedented fury, the group had scattered, each driver desperate to find shelter. She had become separated from the others, wandering on foot after her wagon overturned, and had taken refuge at this abandoned post only to find these men already inside, their intentions clear from the moment they laid eyes on her. The stranger stepped closer, and in the dim light filtering through the broken windows, she finally saw his face. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sharp features softened slightly by concern. His eyes were a striking shade of gray that seemed to reflect the storm itself, and despite the violence he had just committed, there was something gentle in the way he looked at her. "I am Zachary Emerson," he said, extending a gloved hand. "I have a cabin about 2 miles north. This storm is not letting up any time soon. You will freeze if you stay here." Miriam glanced at the dead men scattered around them, then back at Zachary. She knew she had no choice. "Miriam Easton," she managed, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die." "Not today," Zachary said simply. He moved to the corner where the men had piled their supplies and began sorting through them, pulling out a thick wool blanket. He draped it over Miriam's shoulders, his hands lingering just a moment to ensure it was secure. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Miriam said, though she was shaking so badly she was not entirely sure it was true. Zachary nodded and led her outside to his horse, a massive bay gelding that stood patient in the howling wind. He swung up into the saddle first, then reached down to pull Miriam up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his coat, and pressed her face against his back as they headed into the storm. The ride to his cabin seemed to take hours, though it could not have been more than 30 minutes. By the time they arrived, Miriam was so cold she could barely feel her fingers or toes. Zachary helped her down and half-carried her inside, settling her into a chair near the fireplace while he quickly built up the fire. The cabin was small but well-maintained, with sturdy log walls and a single large room that served as both living space and bedroom. A narrow loft overhead held supplies, and through a doorway, she could see what looked like a small kitchen area. "Get those wet clothes off," Zachary said, turning his back to give her privacy as he rummaged through a trunk in the corner. He pulled out what looked like a flannel shirt and wool trousers. "These will be too big, but they are dry. There is a blanket behind you to wrap yourself in while you change." Miriam did as he instructed, her fingers fumbling with the buttons of her dress. When she was finally wrapped in his oversized clothing and a thick blanket, Zachary busied himself making coffee and heating up what looked like venison stew. He moved around the cabin with easy familiarity, never looking at her directly, but always somehow aware of where she was. "Those men," Miriam said finally, when the silence became too heavy. "Did you know them?" Zachary poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought one to her. "I have seen their type before. Drifters, probably deserters from the cavalry or men running from the law. They have been causing trouble around these parts for the past few weeks. The sheriff in Riverton has been looking for them." "You did not hesitate," Miriam said, cupping the warm mug in her hands, "when you shot them." "No," Zachary agreed, his gray eyes meeting hers steadily. "I did not. Men like that, they do not give you a second chance. I saw what they were about to do to you, and I made my choice." Something in his tone made Miriam's chest tighten. She had never met anyone quite like Zachary Emerson. He spoke with such certainty, such quiet strength, that she found herself believing every word. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" A shadow passed over Zachary's face. He settled into the chair across from her, cradling his own coffee. "My father was a Texas Ranger. He taught me and my brother how to handle a gun before we could properly raid. Said it was more important to stay alive than to know your letters, though my mother made sure we learned both." He paused, staring into the fire. "They died 6 years ago during a Comanche raid. My brother went off to fight in the cavalry and I came up here to start fresh. That was in 1872. Been ranching and trapping ever since." It was November 1878, Miriam calculated. 6 years was a long time to be alone in this harsh country. "I am sorry about your family." Zachary shrugged, but she could see the grief still lingered in his eyes. "What brings you to Wyoming? Riverton is not exactly a destination most people choose willingly." Miriam explained about her aunt, about how her parents had died of fever the previous winter in Missouri, leaving her with nothing but a letter from a relative she had never met and enough money for passage west. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted. "My aunt is my only living family. I just hope she actually exists and that the boarding house is real." "Martha Easton," Zachary said thoughtfully, "runs the Riverton house on Main Street. I know her. She is a good woman, a bit stern but fair. She will take care of you." Relief flooded through Miriam so suddenly that tears sprang to her eyes. "You know her?" "She is real, very real," Zachary confirmed, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It transformed his face completely, softening the hard edges and making him look younger, more approachable. "I stay there sometimes when I come into town for supplies. She makes the best apple pie in 3 counties." They talked through the afternoon as the storm raged outside, sharing stories about their lives and their losses. Miriam learned that Zachary had a small ranch where he raised cattle and horses, that he trapped in the winter months to supplement his income, and that he had been on his way back from checking his trap lines when he had seen smoke from the trading post and decided to investigate. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother's love of gardening and her father's skill with carpentry, about the emptiness that had followed their deaths, and her desperate need to find somewhere she belonged. As evening fell, Zachary prepared supper while Miriam watched from her chair, still wrapped in blankets. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, and she found herself studying the way his hands worked, strong and capable, whether he was slicing bread or stirring the stew. There was something deeply comforting about watching him, about being in this warm cabin while the storm howled outside. "The storm should break by morning," Zachary said as they ate. "I will take you into Riverton then. It is only about 8 miles from here." "Thank you," Miriam said, "for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you." Zachary looked at her across the small table, his gray eyes serious. "You do not owe me anything, Miriam. What those men were planning, no woman deserves that. No person deserves that. I did what any decent man would do." But Miriam knew that was not true. She had met plenty of men who would have ridden past, who would have decided it was not their business, or worse, who might have joined in. Zachary Emerson was different, and she found herself drawn to him in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. That night, Zachary insisted she take his bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. Miriam lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm and the crackling of the logs, thinking about the man who had saved her life. She had come west looking for family, for a place to belong, but she had not expected to feel this pull towards someone she had just met. It seemed impossible, ridiculous even, but as she finally drifted off to sleep, it was Zachary's face she saw behind her closed eyes. The morning dawned clear and blindingly bright, the sun reflecting off the fresh snow until everything seemed to glow. Zachary had breakfast ready when Miriam emerged from the bedroom, and after they ate, he helped her into her own clothes, which had dried overnight by the fire. They were wrinkled and still bore the stains of her ordeal, but they were warm and familiar. The ride into Riverton was beautiful, the landscape transformed by the heavy snow into something magical and pristine. Miriam sat behind Zachary again, her arms around his waist, and found herself wishing the journey could last longer. But soon enough, the town came into view, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the banks of the Wind River, smoke rising from dozens of chimneys into the cold morning air. Riverton was larger than Miriam had expected, with a proper main street lined with shops and businesses. Zachary guided his horse directly to the Riverton house, a substantial two-story building with a wide front porch and freshly painted shutters. Before they could even dismount, the front door flew open, and a tall, sturdy woman in her 50s rushed out. "Miriam," the woman called, her weathered face breaking into a smile. "Is that you? I have been worried sick since I heard about the storm and the wagon train that got scattered. Some of the other travelers made it in yesterday, but no one knew what happened to you." Zachary helped Miriam down, and she found herself swept into her aunt's embrace. Martha Easton smelled like cinnamon and bread, and her hug was fierce and warm. When she finally pulled back, her sharp eyes moved to Zachary, and her expression shifted to one of understanding. "Zachary Emerson, I should have known. Did you find her?" "She was in trouble at the old Peterson trading post," Zachary said simply. "I got her out and brought her to my cabin until the storm passed." Martha's face darkened. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that has been dealt with," Zachary said firmly. "The sheriff might want to ride out there when the road's clear, but those particular problems will not be bothering anyone again." Martha studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Come inside, both of you. You look half frozen, and I want to hear the whole story." Inside the boarding house, Martha settled them at a large table in the dining room and poured hot tea while Zachary recounted what had happened. He left out the more graphic details, but Martha was no fool. By the time he finished, her hand had found Miriam's and was gripping it tightly. "You saved her life," Martha said, looking at Zachary with unmistakable gratitude. "Those men, they were the ones who attacked the Henderson ranch last month, were they not?" "I believe so," Zachary agreed. "The sheriff will be able to confirm once he sees them." "Good riddance," Martha said firmly. Then she turned to Miriam, her expression softening. "I am so glad you are here, child. I was sorry to hear about your parents. My brother was a good man, and your mother was a saint for putting up with him." She smiled through tears. "You look just like her, you know. Same dark hair and green eyes. She was beautiful, and so are you." Miriam felt tears welling up at the mention of her parents. "Thank you for letting me come. I know we have never met, but I had nowhere else to go." "This is your home now," Martha said firmly. "For as long as you want it. I could use the help running this place. Truth be told, my arthritis has been acting up something fierce this winter." They talked for over an hour, with Martha asking questions about Miriam's journey and her life in Missouri, while Zachary sat quietly, nursing his tea. But Miriam was intensely aware of his presence, of the way his eyes occasionally met hers across the table, holding her gaze for just a moment longer than necessary. Finally, Zachary stood to leave. "I should head back. I have cattle to check on, and this snow will have made a mess of my fences." "Wait," Miriam said, rising as well. "I never properly thanked you." Zachary looked down at her, and for a moment the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken words. "You are safe," he said finally. "That is thanks enough." But as he turned to go, Martha cleared her throat. "Zachary Emerson, you come back for Sunday supper. I mean it. I will not take no for an answer." A slow smile spread across Zachary's face. "Yes, madam, I would not dare refuse." After he left, Martha gave Miriam a knowing look. "That is a good man," she said. "One of the best I have ever known. He does not talk much about his past, but I know he has had a hard time of it. Lost his whole family, and he has been alone out on that ranch for years now. Breaks my heart, it does." Miriam nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She could still feel the ghost of Zachary's warmth where she had held onto him during the ride, could still see the intensity in his gray eyes when he looked at her. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Miriam settled into her new life. Martha's boarding house had 6 guest rooms, and they were nearly always full with travelers, merchants, and the occasional cowboy passing through. Miriam helped with cooking and cleaning, learning the routines of the house and getting to know the town. Riverton was a growing community with a general store, a church, a schoolhouse, and several saloons. The people were friendly but reserved, the way folks tended to be in frontier towns where everyone had their own story and their own reasons for being there. But through it all, Miriam found her thoughts constantly returning to Zachary. She wondered what he was doing, whether he was warm enough in his cabin, whether he thought about her the way she thought about him. It seemed foolish to be so preoccupied with a man she had known for less than a day, but she could not help herself. Sunday arrived cold but clear, and Miriam spent the afternoon helping Martha prepare a feast. They roasted a chicken, made fresh bread and biscuits, and Martha even made her famous apple pie. As the sun began to set, Miriam found herself watching the door, her heart jumping every time she heard a sound outside. Zachary arrived just as the church bells were ringing for evening services, riding up on his bay gelding with saddlebags slung over his shoulder. He had cleaned up, Miriam noticed, his hair damp and combed back, his jaw freshly shaved. He wore a clean shirt under his coat, and when he caught sight of her standing in the doorway, his face lit up with that rare smile that made her stomach flip. "Miss Easton," he said, tipping his hat as he climbed the porch steps. "You are looking well." "As are you, Mr. Emerson," Miriam replied, suddenly shy. "Please come in. Supper is almost ready." The evening was magical. They ate at Martha's private table in her sitting room, the 3 of them talking and laughing like old friends. Zachary brought news from the outlying ranches, and Martha shared town gossip with obvious delight. But mostly, Miriam and Zachary kept finding excuses to look at each other, their eyes meeting across the table in a way that made Martha hide her smile behind her napkin. After supper, Martha claimed fatigue and retired early, leaving Miriam and Zachary alone in the sitting room. They sat by the fire, the silence between them comfortable but charged with possibility. "I have been thinking about you," Zachary said finally, his voice low. I know it has only been a few days, but I cannot seem to get you out of my mind. Miriam's heart raced. I have been thinking about you too, all the time actually. I feel foolish admitting it. Not foolish, Zachary said. He shifted closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, the slight scar above his left eyebrow. Miriam, I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other, but I have never felt this way before, and I am not a man who lies about his feelings. What are you saying? Miriam whispered, though she thought she knew, hoped she knew. I am saying I would like to court you properly, Zachary said, if you are willing, if your aunt approves. I do not have much to offer beyond a small ranch and a hard life, but I promise I would work every day to make you happy. Miriam felt tears pricking her eyes, but they were tears of joy. Yes, she said. Yes, I would like that very much. Zachary reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle but firm. I will do this right, he promised. I will come to town every Sunday. I will bring you flowers when they bloom in spring. I will give you time to be sure. I am already sure, Miriam said softly, squeezing his hand. I think I knew from the moment you looked at me in that trading post. I felt it, Zachary, like something just clicked into place. They sat there by the fire until late into the night, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's dreams and fears. Zachary told her about his plans to expand his ranch, about the beautiful valley where his land lay, about the way the mountains looked at sunrise. Miriam told him about her love of reading, about how she had always wanted to learn to ride properly, about her dream of having a family of her own someday. When Zachary finally left, he paused at the door and cupped Miriam's face gently in his hand. Sleep well, Miriam Easton. I will see you next Sunday. That is too long, Miriam said, making him laugh. Then perhaps I will find reasons to come to town more often, he said, his thumb brushing across her cheek in a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. True to his word, Zachary came to town every Sunday, and often during the week as well, always with some excuse about needing supplies or having business with one of the other ranchers. He and Miriam would walk along the river when the weather permitted, or sit in Martha's parlor when it did not, slowly building a foundation of friendship and trust beneath the growing attraction between them. As winter gave way to early spring, their relationship deepened. Zachary taught Miriam to ride on a gentle mare he brought in from his ranch, and she proved to be a quick learner, fearless in the saddle. They would ride out into the foothills together, always properly chaperoned by one of Martha's trusted lodgers, or by Martha herself when her health permitted, and Zachary would point out landmarks and tell her stories about the land. In March, Zachary took Miriam to see his ranch for the first time, with Martha accompanying them in a wagon. The land was everything he had described and more, a beautiful valley surrounded by rolling hills, with the Wind River Mountains visible in the distance. His cabin looked different in daylight, larger and more substantial than Miriam remembered from that terrifying night. He had added on to it, he explained, building a separate bedroom and expanding the kitchen. He showed them his modest herd of cattle, his small stable with 3 horses, and the garden plot where he planned to plant vegetables once the ground fully thawed. It is not much yet, Zachary said, watching Miriam's face anxiously, but it has potential. With hard work and time, this could be a real ranch, something to build a future on. It is beautiful, Miriam said honestly. She could see it so clearly, the future he was describing. She could imagine curtains in the windows, flowers planted around the porch, children playing in the yard. And in every vision, Zachary was there, solid and steady, the anchor around which everything else revolved. That evening, as they prepared to return to town, Zachary pulled Miriam aside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the spring air smelled of new grass and possibility. "Miriam," he said, taking both her hands in his, "I know we have only been courting for 4 months. I know that by some standards that is not very long. But I have lived enough life to know what I want, and I want you. I want to wake up in this place every morning with you beside me. I want to build a life here together, raise a family, grow old watching the seasons change. Will you marry me?" Miriam's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "Yes," she said, not needing even a moment to think about it. "Yes, Zachary, I will marry you." He kissed her then, their first real kiss, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling so hard their faces hurt. Martha, watching from the wagon, wiped tears from her eyes and called out that it was about time. They were married 6 weeks later, in late April of 1879, in the small church in Riverton, with seemingly the entire town in attendance. Miriam wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Zachary had picked himself that morning. He wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous as he waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving Miriam's face as she walked down the aisle on Martha's arm. The ceremony was short but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Zachary kissed Miriam with such tenderness that several of the women in the congregation openly wept. The reception was held at Martha's boarding house, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. But eventually, Zachary and Miriam slipped away, riding back to the ranch under a sky full of stars. In the cabin, Zachary had lit candles and built up the fire, and he carried Miriam over the threshold with ease, setting her down gently in the middle of the room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Emerson," he said softly, cupping her face in his hands. "Home," Miriam repeated, tasting the word. It felt right, more right than anything ever had before. That night, they came together with a mix of passion and tenderness, learning each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's hearts. Zachary was gentle and patient, making sure Miriam felt safe and cherished, and when they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, Miriam felt a peace she had not known since before her parents died. The next months were filled with hard work but also with joy. Miriam threw herself into making the ranch a real home, planting the garden, sewing curtains and quilts, cooking meals that made Zachary groan with pleasure. She learned to help with the ranch work too, feeding the horses and chickens they acquired, even helping to doctor a sick calf. Zachary treated her as a true partner, asking her opinion on decisions about the ranch and respecting her judgment. They made frequent trips into town to visit Martha, who delighted in their obvious happiness. The older woman's health was declining, her arthritis making it harder for her to manage the boarding house alone, and by summer, Miriam and Zachary had convinced her to hire additional help. Martha protested the expense, but Zachary quietly paid for it himself, refusing to let his wife's only family work herself into an early grave. In September, Miriam realized she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening after supper, watching nervously for his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, as if not quite believing what he had heard, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably echoed across the entire valley. He picked her up and spun her around, kissing her face all over until she was laughing and begging him to put her down. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Miriam asked, though she could clearly see he was. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Zachary said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "I never thought I would have this, Miriam. A family of my own. I thought I would spend my life alone out here, but you changed everything. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Miriam did have some morning sickness in the early months. Zachary was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about her doing too much work. Martha came to stay with them for the last month, determined to be there when the baby arrived, and her presence brought Miriam great comfort. Their son was born on a beautiful May morning in 1880, arriving with lusty cries that announced his presence to the world. He had Zachary's gray eyes and Miriam's dark hair, and both parents fell instantly and completely in love. They named him William, after Zachary's father, with the middle name James after Miriam's father. Zachary held his son with such tenderness that Miriam found herself falling in love with her husband all over again. He was a devoted father from the start, walking the floor with William at night, changing his diapers without complaint, talking to him in a soft voice about the ranch and the land and all the things they would do together. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered, growing steadily as Zachary's hard work and smart decisions paid off. They hired a hand to help with the heavier work, a young man named Tom who was respectful and hardworking. Miriam's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and enough extra to sell in town. They added onto the cabin again, building a proper second story with bedrooms for their growing family. William was joined by a daughter, Sarah, in 1882, and another son, Jacob, in 1884. The house rang with the sounds of children's laughter, and Zachary would often come in from working to find Miriam surrounded by their little ones, reading to them or teaching them letters, and the look of contentment on his face never failed to warm her heart. Martha remained a constant presence in their lives, though she eventually sold the boarding house and moved into a small cottage in town. She visited the ranch often, delighting in her great nieces and nephews, as she called them, and Zachary made sure she never wanted for anything. She lived to see William start school and Sarah take her first steps, passing away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1885. They buried her in the Riverton Cemetery, and Miriam grieved for the aunt who had given her a home and a family when she had nothing. But life continued as it always does. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Miriam and Zachary's love only deepened with time. They had their challenges, of course, harsh winters and dry summers, cattle that got sick and crops that sometimes failed. But they faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Miriam back to the spot where he had first proposed, near the cabin as the sun was setting. The children were staying in town with a friend, giving them a rare evening alone. "You remember what I promised you that day?" Zachary asked, holding both her hands just as he had 10 years earlier. "You promised to wake up beside me every morning to build a life together, to grow old watching the seasons change," Miriam recited, the words burned into her memory. "I have kept those promises," Zachary said, "and I intend to keep keeping them for the rest of my life. You are everything to me, Miriam. You and our children, this life we have built, it is more than I ever dreamed possible." "I love you," Miriam said simply, reaching up to cup his face. There were lines around his eyes now, and threads of silver in his dark hair, but to her, he was more handsome than ever. From that very first moment, when you came riding through that snowstorm like a hero from a story, I have loved you. "I did not feel much like a hero that day," Zachary admitted. "I was scared to death I was going to be too late, that those men were going to hurt you before I could stop them. When I saw you standing there, so brave even though you were terrified, something in me just knew. I would have done anything to protect you." "You did protect me," Miriam said. "You saved my life and then you gave me a reason to live. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. I was so lost before I met you, Zachary. I did not even realize how lost I was." They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in those same shades of orange and pink they had seen on the night they got engaged. The ranch stretched out around them, solid and real, a testament to their hard work and dedication. From the house, they could see the warm glow of lamplight in the windows, and Miriam thought about their children sleeping safely in their beds, about the life they had created here in this wild, beautiful place. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked quietly. "This life is hard, Miriam. You could have had an easier time if you had married someone else, maybe a shopkeeper in town or a banker. You would have had a bigger house, fancier dresses, less work." Miriam looked at him with such fierce love that he caught his breath. "I have never regretted a single moment. I do not want an easier life, Zachary. I want this life with you right here. I want our children growing up with dirt under their fingernails and wildflowers in their hair. I want to wake up every morning and see the mountains and know that we built something real here, something that matters. I want to grow old with you, watching our grandchildren play in this same yard." Zachary kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Miriam kissed him back with equal fervor. Even after 10 years of marriage, he could still make her heart race, could still make her feel like that young woman who had ridden behind him through the snow, holding on to him like he was her only anchor in the storm. And in many ways, he was. Zachary Emerson had saved her life that November day in 1878, but he had done so much more than that. He had given her a reason to live, a family to love, a home to cherish. He had shown her what it meant to be truly known and truly loved, flaws and all. He had been her partner in every sense of the word, supporting her dreams and sharing his own, building a life together that was richer and fuller than either of them could have imagined. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Miriam thought about the girl she had been, scared and alone in that abandoned trading post, certain she was going to die. She could never have imagined then that her darkest moment would lead to her greatest joy. But that was the beautiful mystery of life, she had learned. You never knew when your whole world was about to change, when the person who would alter your destiny forever was about to ride into your life through a snowstorm. The years continued to pass, bringing with them both challenges and triumphs. In 1887, a severe drought threatened their cattle, but Zachary's decision to dig irrigation channels from the nearby creek saved most of the herd. William, now 7, was already showing signs of inheriting his father's ranching instincts, following Zachary around and asking endless questions about the cattle and the land. Sarah, at 5, was her mother's shadow in the kitchen and garden, her small hands already skilled at kneading bread and planting seeds. Little Jacob, just 3, was the family wild card, fearless and mischievous, keeping them all on their toes. In 1889, Miriam gave birth to another daughter whom they named Martha after her beloved aunt. The little girl had red hair, a throwback to some distant relative, and a temperament to match. She was fiery and determined, and Zachary doted on her shamelessly, carrying her around on his shoulders and letting her wrap him around her tiny finger. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By 1890, they had nearly 200 head of cattle and had become one of the more successful ranches in the area. Zachary's reputation as an honest, hardworking man spread, and younger ranchers often sought his advice. He was generous with his knowledge, remembering his own difficult early years, and more than one struggling family had reason to be grateful for Zachary Emerson's help. Miriam had become known in her own right as well, for her beautiful garden and her skill with healing herbs. She had learned from an old Shoshone woman who lived near town, trading bread and preserves for knowledge of natural remedies. When people in the area fell ill or were injured, they often sent for Mrs. Emerson, knowing she would come with her bag of herbs and tinctures and her calm, capable presence. One particularly harsh winter in 1891, a family of homesteaders a few miles away found themselves in desperate straits. The father had broken his leg, and with no one to do the heavy work, they were at risk of losing everything. Zachary and Miriam, hearing of their plight, organized the other ranchers in the area. The men helped with the work while Miriam tended to the injured man and made sure the family had enough food. When spring came, the homesteader's place was not only still standing but actually improved, and the father's leg had healed straight and strong thanks to Miriam's careful nursing. The grateful family tried to pay them, but Zachary refused. "We help each other out here," he said simply. "That is how we survive. You would do the same for us if the situation was reversed." And it was true. When a fire threatened their barn in the summer of 1892, neighbors appeared seemingly out of nowhere to help fight the flames. They saved the barn and most of what was inside, and Miriam stood with her children, watching the community come together, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built here. William was 10 now, and Zachary had started teaching him to shoot, just as his own father had taught him. Miriam watched them practice, her heart in her throat every time her son raised the rifle, but she understood it was a necessary skill in this place. Zachary was careful and patient, teaching not just the mechanics of shooting but the responsibility that came with it. "A gun is not a toy," Miriam overheard him tell William one afternoon. "It is a tool and a dangerous one. You never point it at anything you do not intend to shoot, and you never shoot at anything unless you are certain of what is beyond it. The moment you pick up a gun, you are responsible for where every bullet goes." William listened with the seriousness of a much older child, and Miriam knew he would carry his father's lessons with him always. She thought about that day in the trading post, about the 5 men Zachary had killed to save her life. He had never spoken of it again, had never seemed haunted by it, and Miriam understood that he had made his peace with it. He had done what was necessary to protect someone who could not protect themselves, and he would do it again if he had to. But he also taught his children that violence was always a last resort, that there was no glory in taking a life, only sometimes a necessity. As the decade drew to a close, Miriam and Zachary found themselves entering middle age with grace. They were both in their late 30s now, their bodies showing the wear of hard work but their spirits still strong. Their oldest children were becoming young adults, William tall and serious at 15, Sarah beautiful and capable at 13. Jacob at 11 was still finding his way, more interested in books than ranching, and Zachary encouraged this too, understanding that each child needed to find their own path. Little Martha, now 5, remained the baby of the family, though Miriam suspected there might be one more child coming, having recently felt the familiar signs. She told Zachary on a warm September evening in 1894, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He was 40 now, his hair well streaked with silver, but his gray eyes were still as sharp and his body still strong from years of ranch work. "Another baby," he said, his hand moving to her stomach just as it had with their first. "At our age." "Apparently so," Miriam said, watching his face carefully. They had not planned for more children, but she found she was not unhappy about it. A slow smile spread across Zachary's face. "Well then," he said, "I suppose we are not done yet. This house is going to be full of noise and chaos for a few more years." "Does that bother you?" Miriam asked. "Bother me." Zachary pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Miriam, every single one of our children is a blessing I never expected to have. This one will be no different. Our family is the greatest thing I have ever done, greater than this ranch or anything else. I am grateful for every moment. Their last child, a son they named Thomas after Zachary's brother who had died in the cavalry years before, was born in May of 1895. He came into the world during a thunderstorm, his cries mixing with the sound of rain on the roof, and Miriam, exhausted but happy, watched Zachary hold his youngest son and saw tears running down his weathered face. "What is wrong?" she asked, concerned. "Nothing is wrong," Zachary said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am just thinking about that day in the storm when I found you. I was heading home from my trap lines, tired and cold, and I almost did not stop at that trading post. If I had not seen the smoke, if I had decided to just keep riding, I would have missed you. I would have missed all of this." He gestured around the room where their older children were gathered, all of them waiting to meet their new brother. William stood tall and proud at 16, already looking like a man. Sarah held 5-year-old Martha on her hip, her face glowing with excitement. Jacob was reading to them from a book of poems, his young voice filling the room with beauty. "But you did stop," Miriam said softly. "You did find me. And we found each other. That was not chance, Zachary. That was fate or providence or whatever you want to call it. We were meant to find each other." "I believe that," Zachary said. "With everything I am, I believe that." The years flowed on like the wind river itself, constant and unstoppable. William married a schoolteacher from town in 1900 and took over a portion of the ranch, building his own house on the property with Zachary's help. Sarah married a young doctor the following year, moving to Lander but visiting often with her husband, who adored his in-laws and their sprawling, noisy family gatherings. Jacob surprised everyone by going to college in Laramie to study literature and history. But he always came home for summers and holidays, his head full of ideas, and his heart still tied to the land he had grown up on. He became a teacher, eventually returning to Riverton to teach at the school he had attended as a child. Martha grew into a beautiful, spirited young woman who could ride as well as any man and was not afraid to speak her mind. She caused her father endless worry and pride in equal measure. Thomas, the baby, showed signs of being a natural horseman, able to calm even the most skittish animals with his quiet presence. In 1905, Miriam and Zachary celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. William had 3 children now, Sarah too, and the house was full of the sound of young voices and laughter. Miriam, now 44, had gray streaking her dark hair, and Zachary, at 51, moved a bit slower than he used to, but they were both still healthy and active, still deeply in love. That evening, after everyone had gone home or to bed, they walked out to the spot where Zachary had proposed so many years ago. The cabin had grown into a substantial ranch house, the small herd into a successful operation, but this spot remained special to them. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" Miriam asked, leaning against Zachary as they watched the stars come out. "What is that?" "Those 5 men in the trading post. I know it sounds strange, but I wonder what would have happened to them if they had made different choices. If they had been different kinds of men. They could have had families, wives who loved them, children who looked up to them. Instead, they chose violence and cruelty, and it ended their lives." Zachary was quiet for a moment. "I have thought about that too. I do not take pride in killing them, Miriam, but I do not regret it either. They made their choices, and I made mine. I chose you, and I would make that same choice 1,000 times over." "I know," Miriam said, "and I am grateful every single day that you were the man you are. That you saw someone in trouble and did not look away. that you had the courage and skill to act. You saved my life that day, but you did more than that. You showed me what it means to be truly good, truly brave. You have been showing me that for 26 years now." They stood there in comfortable silence, two people who had become so entwined that they could hardly remember a time when they were separate. The land stretched out around them, the ranch they had built together, the family they had raised. It was not an easy life, had never been an easy life, but it was a good one, rich with meaning and love. As they walked back to the house, Zachary's arm around Miriam's shoulders, she felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. She thought about that scared young woman in the snowstorm, cornered by men who meant her harm, certain she was about to die. That woman could never have imagined this future, this full and beautiful life. But it had all been there, waiting for her, in the form of a cowboy on a bay horse, riding through the storm to save her. The seasons continued their eternal dance, and Miriam and Zachary continued to dance with them. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated births and mourned deaths, watched their children grow and their grandchildren multiply. By 1910, they were in their 50s, considered elders in the community, and people sought them out for advice and wisdom. Zachary had largely turned over the day-to-day running of the ranch to William, though he still helped when he could. His body ached more now, especially in the cold months, but his mind was sharp and his spirit undimmed. Miriam spent her days between the garden, the kitchen, and visits with her ever-growing family. She had 11 grandchildren now, with more on the way, and she delighted in each one. One summer evening in 1912, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Miriam took Zachary's hand and said, "Do you know what I realized today?" "What is that?" "It has been 34 years since that day in the snowstorm. 34 years since you rode up and changed my whole life, and every single year has been a gift." Zachary squeezed her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "Every day with you has been a gift, Miriam. I was so alone before you came into my life. I did not even realize how alone I was until I was not anymore." "We found each other," Miriam said simply. "Two lost souls in a snowstorm, and we found each other. And built a family," Zachary added, "and a home, and a life worth living." They sat there as the stars came out, the same stars that had witnessed their courtship, their wedding, the births of their children, and every moment in between. The ranch was quiet now, the grandchildren gone home, the cattle settled for the night. It was just the two of them, the way it had been in the beginning and the way it would be until the end. Years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. They lost Tom, their hired hand who had become like family, to pneumonia in 1914. They celebrated Martha's wedding in 1915 to a young rancher who loved her fierce spirit. They welcomed more grandchildren, and then great-grandchildren, the family tree growing ever larger and more complex. In 1920, on their 41st wedding anniversary, Miriam and Zachary hosted a huge celebration at the ranch. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren came from all over Wyoming and even neighboring states. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. At one point, Zachary stood up to make a toast. 41 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his 66 years. I was a lonely man living on a small ranch, wondering if I would spend my whole life alone. Then a snowstorm came, and in that storm, I found the greatest treasure of my life. Miriam Easton was her name then, and she was scared and brave and beautiful, and I knew the moment I saw her that my life had just changed forever. He turned to look at Miriam, his gray eyes as warm as they had ever been. You have given me everything, Miriam. 5 children, More grandchildren and great-grandchildren than I can count some days. A home full of love and laughter, and a reason to wake up every morning. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend. Every good thing in my life has come from the decision I made that day to stop at that trading post, and I thank God every day that I did." Miriam stood and kissed him, not caring that everyone was watching, and the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, this family they had built together, this legacy of love that would outlast them both. That night, lying in bed with Zachary's arms around her, Miriam thought about the long road they had traveled together. They were old now, their bodies worn and tired, but their love had only grown stronger with time. She thought about all the moments that had brought them here, the big ones and the small ones, the triumphs and the struggles. Every single moment had mattered, had shaped them into the people they were, had woven the tapestry of their life together. "Zachary," she whispered in the darkness. "Yes, love, thank you for saving me that day." He pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me, for loving me even when I did not think I deserved to be loved. You saved me too, Miriam. Maybe even more than I saved you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other in a snowstorm and had never let go. Outside, the wind whispered through the valley, carrying with it the promise of another tomorrow, another day to love and be loved, another day to count their blessings and marvel at the beautiful, unexpected life they had created together. The ranch would pass to their children and grandchildren, the land continuing to provide for the family Miriam and Zachary had started. Their story would be told and retold, becoming part of family legend. The cowboy who had ridden through a snowstorm and shot 5 men to save the woman who would become his wife. The woman who had been brave enough to take a chance on a lonely rancher and build an empire of love with him. Together, they had created something that would last long after they were gone, a testament to the power of courage, love, and the choices we make in the moments that define our lives.